My wife accidentally caused a fire at the hospital, tearfully begging me to take the blame. Heartbroken, I signed the confession, but when I went to court, I learned the fire killed many people, including my daughter, who was hospitalized with a fever, and my beloved wife actually accused me of arson in court, presenting all sorts of fabricated evidence. After dying wrongfully, my soul floated in midair. I saw my wife leaning into the arms of her childhood sweetheart doctor, smiling sweetly. Thanks to your clever plan, Melody can now be a heart donor for our son, and using the blame-shifting trick to eliminate Zoran as an obstacle, our family of 3 can finally be together. I finally realized that this was all their sinister plot. My daughter Melody had just come of age, but due to congenital intellectual disability, she had the mental capacity of a 5-year-old. How could they bring themselves to do this to her? Consumed by hatred, I opened my eyes again and found myself back 1 hour before the fire started. I woke up suddenly to Meadow's sweet, coaxing voice. Honey, I think I left my earrings on the 6th floor. Could you go find them for me? Staring at her always beautiful and gentle face, I suppressed the icy hatred in my eyes and nodded. Meadow smiled and gave me a kiss. My husband is the best to me. I held back my nausea until I turned and left the hospital room, then furiously wiped my face with my sleeve. The stinging pain confirmed it. I had really been reborn. In my past life, Meadow used that same gentle, innocent face to cry and coax me into signing a confession. In court, she put on this weak act, revealing mysterious injuries all over her body, sobbing that I had abused her. She fooled everyone. The judge sentenced me to death right there in the courtroom. It wasn't until she visited me privately that Meadow revealed her true face. Zoran, why didn't you just die sooner? Do you know how disgusting it was to be with you? I've been counting down the days until you die. You're such a failure as a man. Just go die in peace. I'll live well without you. That vicious, mocking expression, that was her true nature. I carefully recalled the fire had started on the 6th floor of the hospital ward. The renovation was underway, with numerous flammable coatings stored there, providing an opportunity for someone to deliberately set a fire. It happened in the middle of the night, and the flames spread rapidly. The hospital had no time to react, ultimately resulting in a tragic disaster. In court, the security footage of me searching for something on the 6th floor, combined with my confession, became direct evidence pointing to me as the arsonist. This time, I won't give Meadow a chance to frame me. Under Meadow's secret surveillance, I pretended to head towards the 6th floor, but actually went to the 5th floor and circled back, using another staircase. There was an additional man in a white coat in the hospital room. It was Meadow's childhood sweetheart and my daughter's attending physician, Levi. My daughter had woken up and was crying for her father. Levi roughly covered her mouth and injected her with a syringe of sedative, causing her to fall into a deep sleep. I clenched my fists in anger. In my previous life, was this how Levi suffocated my daughter? Initially, my daughter only had a minor cold. Meadow said she had a friend who was a doctor and brought my daughter in for a checkup. Who would have thought that after one hospital visit, my daughter would end up with a persistent high fever, forcing her to be admitted? Now I see that every step was part of their plan all along. After confirming that my daughter was in a deep sleep, Meadow and Levi exchanged smiles. They embraced and started kissing. The man's malicious voice reached my ears clearly. Later, find a way to get rid of Zoran, then we'll proceed with the plan. You take the boy and escape first. I'll set the fire, then come down to kill this little girl. I couldn't help but laugh coldly as I listened, hatred and anger expanding infinitely in my heart. They wanted to take the lives of my daughter and me? Keep dreaming. This time, I'll take their lives first. I quietly left and found Levi's son's hospital room on the same floor. Staring at the sleeping little boy, my heart turned ice cold. This is Meadow and Levi's love child. Counting the days, it must have been the year I was sent abroad for work. Just because he has a congenital heart condition, those two scumbags are trying to steal my daughter's heart to save their child. In my past life, after I died, I floated in midair, helplessly watching them dissect my daughter. In this life, I will never allow such a thing to happen again. I picked up this child and left the room without looking back. When I returned to my daughter's hospital room, I put on an apologetic face. Sweetie, I'm so sorry. I couldn't find your earrings. Then, pretending to just notice Levi, I said, oh, Dr. Carlisle, you're here too? Making rounds so late. You're really going above and beyond. By the way, when I was on the 6th floor, I ran into your son looking for his dad. I was going to take him back to his room, but I turned my head for a second and he disappeared. In reality, I had just left him in a stairwell corner on one of the floors. He'd be easy to find. Hearing my words, both of their expressions changed instantly. Meadow's voice trembled with anxiety, but she still managed to shoo me away, asking me to go buy her some spaghetti. Seeing her so worried, I could only inwardly scoff. She had the heart to try to kill my daughter, but when her son just wandered off, she was beside herself with concern. They were both her children. How could this woman be such a hypocrite? I pretended to agree and turned to leave. Meadow didn't even wait to make sure I was really gone before she ran out of the room crying with Levi, going straight to look for her son. I took the opportunity to take my daughter away. Sitting in the car, I fell into deep thought. I'd saved my daughter for now, but where could I hide her? In my previous life, Meadow's parents slandered me relentlessly in court, and my own parents, having believed Meadow's lies, looked at me with utter disappointment and accused. Zoran, are you even human? From now on, it's like we never had a son. That feeling of being abandoned by the whole world still makes me tremble with despair when I think about it. Wait, there was still one person who didn't give up on me back then. My eyes lit up, and I quickly drove off in a certain direction. 20 minutes later, I was rapping on a door. A sleepy-eyed woman opened it. Her delicate face instantly lit up with joy when she saw me. Then came a look of bewilderment. Zoran, it's been years since we've seen each other. Why are you suddenly showing up at my place in the middle of the night? This was my college classmate, and also my lawyer in my previous life, Genevieve. Back in college, she had confessed her feelings to me, but I was so focused on dating Meadow at the time that I flat out rejected her. She didn't seem too upset about it then, so I didn't give it much thought. After graduation, we didn't keep in touch for several years. I always just thought of her as an ordinary college acquaintance. But later, when I was falsely accused of arson and the whole world was cursing me, urging the judge to sentence me to death. Only Genevieve stood firmly by my side, running around for me, appealing several times, right up until the last moment before my execution. My soul floated in midair, watching her hug my tombstone, drinking and crying herself to sleep, refusing to leave for days on end. It was then that I realized just how important I was to her. If there's only one person in this world I can trust, it's probably only Genevieve. I turned to her with an apologetic smile, my daughter in tow. I have an urgent matter. Can you look after Melody for a few days? Don't let anyone take her away except me, no matter who comes for her, okay? Genevieve agreed, looking utterly bewildered. Maybe the sedative had worn off. As I was putting my daughter to bed, she woke up. She gripped my collar tightly with one hand and said softly, "Daddy, Melody doesn't want to be apart from you." At that moment, my heart melted completely. It also strengthened my resolve to protect my daughter and seek revenge against those two. I kissed my daughter's forehead. "Daddy will be back soon. Be a good girl and stay with Aunt Genevieve for a few days. Daddy has some very important things to do." Saving my daughter wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of my revenge. I glanced at the clock, 2:35 a.m. The time should be about right. Just as that thought crossed my mind, my phone suddenly rang. The caller ID showed, "Darling." Meadow sounded frantic, blurting out if I had taken our daughter away. I calmly replied, "Yes, our daughter woke up crying for her dad, so I had no choice but to take her with me." "You're full of crap." I clearly gave her a sedative. Almost letting it slip, Meadow nearly bit her tongue. She quickly softened her voice, adding a tearful tone. "Honey, there's been an incident at the hospital. I really need you right now. Can you please come back with our daughter?" So eager for me to take the fall, huh? I'd be damned if I brought our daughter back. I urgently said aloud, "Baby, don't worry, just wait for me. I'm on my way." But my actions were slow and deliberate. After hanging up, I glanced at the car waiting for the red light in front of me, thinking to myself, "Brother, I'm sorry about this." Then I stepped on the gas and crashed right into him. I had been observing earlier. This driver had tried to cut off others several times, cursing when they wouldn't let him pass. He was clearly short-tempered. Sure enough, he got out of his car and started cursing at me. "What the hell? Are you blind? You saw a car in front of you and still rammed into it?" I glanced at the insistent call coming in from Meadow, suppressed a chuckle, then turned and yelled back at him. I engaged in a back-and-forth argument with this burly man for a while, during which time Meadow made over a dozen phone calls. She even had her parents call me. I couldn't help but recall their faces in court when Meadow accused me of domestic violence, and these two old geezers jumped out to curse at me. Zoran's always had a hot temper. He's threatened to kill people several times. The first time we met him, he nearly struck my wife. Burning down a hospital is something he's capable of. Your Honor, you must do right by my daughter. Sentence him. Better yet, give him the death penalty. But I had always treated them well. I accompanied them to doctor's appointments, gave gifts on holidays, and even provided a few $1,000s in living expenses each month. All my goodwill was wasted on ungrateful dogs. They probably knew about Meadow's plan all along. In my past life, they were likely accomplices in my death. Seeing the incoming calls from these two ungrateful wretches, I pressed the answer button. They immediately launched into a tirade of abuse. "Are you on your deathbed or what? You won't even answer my daughter's calls. Do you have any idea how much she needs you right now?" I put on a face full of distress. "Mom, Dad, it's not that I don't want to go. I literally can't leave." I briefly explained the situation. Upon hearing this, the two old-timers immediately said they would come over personally. This played right into my hands. I promptly gave my address, then turned back to continue taunting the burly man. The hulking guy across from me was built like a linebacker. My verbal jabs had his face turning beet red with anger. He rolled up his sleeves, ready to throw down. It was at that precise moment that Mr. and Mrs. Winters arrived on the scene. Mr. and Mrs. Winters, accustomed to their arrogant ways and eager for me to take the blame, roughly shoved me aside. They went straight for the burly man, one pointing at his nose, the other jabbing his shoulder, unleashing a torrent of abuse. The burly man, already fuming from earlier, instantly exploded. He raised his hand and delivered a resounding slap to each of the old-timers' faces. His arms, thicker than soup bowls, sent them tumbling to the ground with a single blow. The two oldsters were stunned. Once they came to their senses, they started wailing and making a scene. I stifled a laugh and glanced at the time. We'd been here for over 2 hours. With the traffic cops arriving, I finally agreed to pay compensation. Mr. and Mrs. Winters, still fixated on making me take the fall, urged me to go to the hospital, their faces swollen on one side. In the car, the two of them winced in pain, while still finding the energy to lecture me. "Zoran, Meadow has been with you for so many years, even carrying your child for 9 months, and giving birth to your daughter. Do you know how much she's contributed and sacrificed for you? You must love her properly. Even if it costs you your life, you have to protect her, understand?" I could barely keep from rolling my eyes. It seems they've realized they can't kill my daughter, so they're planning to get rid of me first. After my death in the future, Meadow would become our daughter's sole guardian. At that point, she could do whatever she wanted with our child. But I wasn't about to let them get their way so easily. While absent-mindedly responding to them, I secretly sent a message to my journalist friend. "There's breaking news. I've sent you the address. Get here quickly." By the time I finally arrived at the hospital, Meadow was nearly frantic with worry. Just like in her past life, she fell to her knees before me, sobbing. In her previous life, she had begged me, "Honey, I accidentally set the hospital on fire. Our child can't be without a mother. I can't go to prison. Please, won't you save me?" This time around, she took a deep breath, about to start her act. "Honey, I accidentally," but as she looked up, she found a camera lens thrust in her face. Meadow's tearful expression froze. "What is the meaning of this?" "Dashiell's just here to film a news story," I coolly reminded her. "This is a live broadcast, by the way." Meadow was at a loss for words. At that moment, Levi suddenly appeared by her side. He was much calmer than she was, and addressed the camera with a smile. "The hospital mysteriously caught fire earlier, but fortunately, we all escaped. However, I find the circumstances of this fire rather suspicious." As he finished speaking, he turned to look directly at me. Simultaneously, she subtly nudged Meadow. It seemed she wanted to direct suspicion towards me right in front of the livestream camera. Meadow finally caught on, looking at me cautiously, Honey, you've argued with the nurses a few times before. This fire couldn't be. Mr. and Mrs. Winters were standing beside them at this point, and Mrs. Winters rolled her eyes at me directly. Zoran is just a violent maniac. He's always talking about killing this person or that person, and recently he's been complaining that the hospital can't cure his daughter, saying he'd burn down the hospital sooner or later. I bet he's the one who did it. Just then, a police officer happened to pass by, and Mrs. Winters actually grabbed the officer, pointing at me. This is the culprit, officer. Arrest him. Execute him tomorrow. I coldly watched their coordinated performance, each sentence pushing me closer to being labeled the perpetrator. That scene of being abandoned by the whole world replayed itself in this moment. Only this time, what welled up in my heart wasn't despair, but endless hatred. I wanted nothing more than to tear them all to pieces. Levi put on an act, saying, "We need evidence to convict someone. Our hospital surveillance footage is automatically uploaded daily. My colleague is already checking the footage. Rest assured, the one who deserves to die won't escape." A smile of absolute certainty curled at the corner of his lips. He was convinced I had been to the 6th floor, while he himself had already taken care of the surveillance cameras before setting the fire. At that moment, a nurse came running over. Levi's smile grew even more smug. "Well, do we have results from the security footage?" Meadow also smirked at me, her face full of eagerness, as if she couldn't wait to see me dead. However, the nurse shook her head. "Dr. Carlisle, the surveillance shows that no one went to the 6th floor tonight." Their smiles instantly froze. I stared at Levi and Meadow, calmly giving a slight smile, but I might be able to provide some clues about the culprit.